Welcome back to the Supply Chain Lab, where we bring you the inside and complex systems that power our world. I'm your host, Shihluke Maluleke, and today we're diving into a topic that touches every aspect of our economy, the money supply chain. When we think of supply chains, we often imagine goods moving across the globe, from factories to storefronts, but there's another equally crucial supply chain that's a bit more hidden from our view, the journey of cash. From the minting of coins and printing of banknotes to their secure transportation across South Africa, the money supply chain is a sophisticated operation that ensures the stability of our financial systems. Joining us today is Lance Kegel, a proactive, results-driven professional with over 25 years of experience in financial systems and cash management. Lance has a proven track record in optimizing processes, systems, and logistics across multiple industries, including retail, automotive, and banking. With deep expertise in cash logistics and the evolving role of cash in the digital world, Lance consistently delivers on business objectives to drive efficient operations. We're also pleased to welcome Dr. Kilborn back. In this episode, we'll explore the logistics behind moving billions of rands across the country, the security protocols that keep our cash safe, and the role of cash in financial inclusion and combating crime. We'll also look at how digital revolution is transforming the way we think about money and the implications this has for the future of money and supply chain. So whether you're a finance enthusiast, a logistic professional, or just someone who's curious about how your money gets into your wallet, stay tuned for a conversation that will change the way you think about cash. Thank you so much for joining us. So just to kick this conversation off, I think it would be great to get to know you a little bit better. If you could start by telling us a bit about yourself, Lance, what your journey has been like and how you came to work in this field of cash.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I've been in logistics probably my entire career. As you said earlier, I started in import and export, and then went into automotive and retail. And when I got opportunity to actually work in the banking environment, to me it was the next step. Cash to me is just another commodity. You want to maintain customer service, and to do that you want to optimize your cost. It costs you money to put a product on the shelf. It costs you money to move a product. So if it's cash, it costs you money to put it in an ATM or to put it into a bank. And it also costs you money to move it. It's a lot more complex than that, but the principles behind cash as a product still apply. So that's where I started, and the last few years worked in that extensively and learned a lot about how cash moves and trying to look at all the different channels of how it operates.
I think this is such an interesting conversation. If I think about it, Dr. Kilborn, you know the image, the supply chain image in all the textbooks where it's like a warehouse, a truck, and then, a store at the end. Then cash is this little line that's just written cash, and it's like an arrow moving forward and backwards. I think it's so interesting that when you think about this image, you don't actually realize the importance of money, and that money also actually works with like there's a supply chain side of money as well. So if you could just give us just a brief overlook of how it actually works when it comes to the movement of money from a supply chain perspective.
Okay, so let's start with how it's manufactured. In our country, SARB, the Reserve Bank, is responsible for the production of money. They control the reliability of cash and keep it safe. So they will decide how much cash needs to be injected into the industry. To do that, they actually get data feeds from all the banks. How much money was taken out in an ATM and a branch each day, countrywide. And then you roll up all that data to say, okay, we need to move how much cash. And that'll then work out how much they need to produce. And then they send that cash through CIT service providers to cash centers around the country. Obviously, a lot of demand in Gauteng, so there's a lot of trips into Gauteng, but you need to get cash into places like Kuruman and far outlying areas as well. So that cash then goes out to those cash centers. That's what you call like a tier one, the first level industry type movement of cash. From then it goes...
Can I just stop you with
Yes.
the manufacturing portion? Is there a demand planner and a supply planner that plans this, or is that all automated? It's just information that is fed from one system and then...
I would have a guess. I would guess that they get the data from the banks.
Okay.
And based on that information, they need to work out by denomination how much cash is required. And it's done at a denomination level. So if I could just quickly compare this to how it operates in a normal kind of like, say, FMCG type environment. In that environment, you might have, 20,000 SKUs and, say, 20 warehouses. Now you're flipping it upside down. Now you've got 11 SKUs, from a 10-cent piece up to a 200 rand note. We don't manufacture 1 and 2 and 5 cent pieces anymore. So you've got 11 SKUs, and you might have something like 30,000 warehouses in the country. Some of those warehouses might be in the form of an ATM. Other warehouses will be in a bank or a branch or a cash center. So you've kind of shifted it horizontally and vertically to get a very different view.
Lance, if I may ask, before we get into the finer detail of managing cash, how much cash is in circulation in our economy? I've seen figures of 170 billion rands of cash, and is that true? And how does it compare to previous years? I understand that it's slightly on the increase. Is that true?
It is still increasing, surprisingly enough. And you would think with us moving into a digital world, you would think it will start dying out. And it's not. It's increasing, although the percentage of growth on an annual basis is definitely declining.
Wow. And is that, how does, worldwide, what is the norm? I've seen some countries where there's definitely a drive towards cashless transactions. I think Sweden recently reported that only 8% of their point-of-sale transactions are still done in cash.
Yes.
Right? But then I've seen in America, the cash in circulation ratio to GDP is something like, 60 or 70%. It's very high, much higher than I expected. And apparently there was the Federal Reserve pumped a lot of cash into the economy to stimulate it. But I was surprised to see that there's such varying levels of cash in different economies. But it looks like there's a drive towards a movement away from cash, certainly in developed nations, but in developing countries, there's still very much a need for cash.
Yes.
So it's not getting less.
No, not at all. And I think there are various reasons for it. I think the fact that we have a very high unemployment rate, and you have a very dispersed population where you have places like Northern Cape, where you have very poor infrastructure. You don't have actually access to digital solutions.
Oh, yeah.
So you rely on getting cash out of an ATM. I think they said something like 80% of our adult population have bank accounts, but 48% of those go to an ATM once and draw their full amount each month, once a month.
Wow, that's interesting.
So they're very reliant on cash on that basis. And they don't trust the digital solutions, and they probably don't have access to them. They might have a mobile phone, but that's about the limit they've got.
Yeah, and then you also may have in the informal sector that people might not necessarily can afford the cost of putting or cash in a bank account,
yes.
Or to pay the deposit cost and so forth.
Yeah, I think there's a trust element and there's a cost element. There's a perceived notion that cash doesn't cost you anything. And you also know you trust cash because you know when you pay someone with cash, you've done the exchange in public and you've walked away with your goods.
Tangible.
You can see that you got your service and you've paid it.
And there's of course the old tax incentive maybe also for some. Which
there are some privacy.
Not so good, but
privacy concerns. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So what is interesting, you mentioned infrastructure as one of the issues with why people continue to use cash. How do you, as an organization, then deal with the infrastructural challenges and ensuring that the money does reach the end consumer?
So I think banks are under pressure to make cash more affordable and more available in outlying areas, in formal settlements, in townships, in the regional and remote areas that we have. That is probably why you'll see a lot of banks moving away from the fixed walled branches with the treasury inside where they have big vaults and they keep cash safe, to more electronic solution. Put an ATM down, and then the amount of work that's been done getting those ATMs to provide more services. In the old days, you could deposit cash, you could withdraw cash. When you deposited cash, you won't remember this because you probably weren't around at the time, but you put your cash in an envelope and you put it into a machine, and you'd wait 5 days for someone to count it and actually reflect your credit. Now the ATMs actually count cash as it goes into the machine. Now you can do other payments, you can pay your tax, things like that, on a machine. So that's what's important, actually take those services closer to the public and make it more affordable.
And so around the ATM, because I've also noticed there's a growth in the use of supermarkets as well as a form of just like dispersing cash. So now people can get money from like your Checkers, your Spar, versus having to go to an actual physical ATM. I'm guessing this is a form of overcoming some of the infrastructural challenges in some areas. Are we going to see more of this moving forward, or are ATMs still going to be the main distributor of cash for people?
So I would think the pressure of putting cash or making cash available through retailers is because you have two different cycles. If you look at the cash cycle, when you get paid, when SASSA grants are paid, what happens then? It goes straight to a retailer. So if you can merge the two, and rather than having to have one collection of cash going to a retailer and spending it, and rather make it one point, you've then merged the two supply chains and you've made it more cost effective. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of money moving cash from retailer to bank and bank to retailer. So I do think it will continue. I think it'll grow.
What is the ratio of ATMs to branches?
Probably, I'm guessing, let me try and work it out in my head.
10 to 1?
25 to 1?
25 to 1.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's a lot more. And there's a lot of pressure to make banks more affordable, to increase that ratio. And now you're going to get a point of, instead of going to a bank where you go to a teller behind a glass, behind a counter, now the teller's going to come to the front, take away the treasury, and that teller will now help you to use an electronic device. So now you'll expand your ATM service as well. So now we're looking at things like putting coin into ATMs, allowing bulk ATMs where you can put a wad of cash into an ATM that counts it and you get immediate credit.
Wow.
So that's going to also transition, and the idea is so that it makes it more affordable for customers.
And what are some of the biggest challenges you and your team currently face with the movement of cash?
The biggest challenge with the movement of cash probably is obviously security. I think everyone's seen news reports about the ATM heists. That's probably the biggest risk. The logistics, I think that's why I have a job in the industry, is because the logistics is complex. If you understand the kind of supply chain, you have ATMs, you have branches, you have cash centers. You also put your devices down at your retailers. Each of those is a separate channel on its own, and you run the risk, when not looking at it carefully, of possibly having a vehicle driving to a certain area to put cash into an ATM at the same time as another truck is driving to an area bringing cash back from a branch. So that's where your logistics complexities come about.
So you kind of want the same vehicle to drop off the cash and...
I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. What the objective is to try and, for example, recycle cash closer to a source, drive less. If you can take cash off the road, you improve your security profile for a start, and you improve your cost. So that's the trick. If you can actually put it together on the same truck, then you reduce that trip and you reduce that mileage that the cash is exposed.
Okay.
So many of the typical logistics challenges confronting companies that move physical or other products, if you would like to see cash as a product, I suppose you can, but you call it a commodity. But like other organizations have in their logistics system, they have transport, they have warehousing, they have inventory holding. Those are all critical decisions that they have to make, and they have to try and obviously find the lowest total cost given a certain customer service level. I assume those principles also apply then to the bank and its movement of cash.
Absolutely. And to me, that's the key ratio. Working out what's your customer service level you're trying to get to, and how do you get the best cost. So banks, for example, they will pay interest for money sitting in an ATM and in a branch.
And that interest, how is it determined? Is it done by the prime lending rate as a basis, or how does it work?
It's probably done by people a lot more clever than me. They will hedge a rate for a 5-year period, for example, take the risk element out of it, and you will buy a certain rate, for example, say 6%, and that's your rate for the next 5 years.
So that's the opportunity cost of capital part of keeping cash in stock.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. So similar to any goods that you have where there's an opportunity cost of capital, you have a cost of capital to keeping money at the bank.
Yes.
And then there's warehousing cost, there's your storage, your insurance, there's a handling cost, those are all relevant. So I can't recall having been to a branch or an ATM ever where I found that the machine was out of cash. Maybe it has happened. I just forgotten about
Maybe
it.
it's just written out of stock, out of order.
Yeah, out of
It's
order.
probably just written out of order.
Maybe, yes. So I don't think
probably
it's
just
out of
written-
stock.
It's
Yeah.
probably written out of order.
So generally speaking, my experience is that the customer service level is quite good. Does it mean that you're sitting with a huge amount of stock there in cash, more than what you
Well,
know,
I'm
more
first of
than
all
what
glad
the
you said
ideal
that
is?
you haven't seen a cash out, because that's something we measure on a daily, if not hourly basis. It's the biggest issue. And there's a team of planners that sit and work out the logistics and the timing to make sure there is no cash outs. And it's quite a dynamic model. We've seen some situations where you go into a farm area, say Worcester, where the bank manager knows that on the 25th, these farmers are going to bring their guys on their vehicles, and they're going to want 100 Rand, maybe 200 Rand notes. That day, it ends 2 days later. They don't want the 100s and 200s, they want 50s and 20s in the ATM. So you've almost got to be dynamic and work out what does that ATM need on that day.
Wow. So the actual SKU is important. So it's not just that there must be X amount in the ATM available. It's the
Yes.
denominations
Yes.
that's also critical.
Yeah.
Why is that so critical?
Well, I think every ATM, as we said, it's its own warehouse. So you've got to work out what your customers want. So if you go to a casino, there's a good chance all you'll get from an ATM are 200 Rand notes, because that's high volume velocity. You've got money going out frequently. If you go to a remote area, people want 10 Rand notes, even 20 Rand notes in an ATM, because they will kind of draw the value to the last limit. I'll give you an example. SASSA grants, if they go up by 20 Rand, instead of saying getting 350 Rand, you get 370 Rand. You've now got to make sure that the ATMs that withdraw SASSA grants contain 20 Rand notes.
Okay.
And how are you getting this data? How are you forecasting what they're going to do? Are you using historical data to forecast this, or are you using real-time data for you to know what's required and when?
Yes.
How are you creating the forecasts?
So we have about 7 years of data that we use. We have more data than that, but we use about 7 years data down to a denom level per day, actually almost per hour, and I'll tell you why now. But then you do time series analysis, you do regression analysis to see, well, what do we predict is going to happen with this ATM? And you can predict fairly well when you average what's going to happen in an area, because you know your SASSA payout days, you know your pay days, your salaries, and then you know you've got a quiet period in the middle of the month where there's not much money going out of the ATMs. And that's when you can focus on, for example, maintaining your ATMs, servicing them, making sure that they're properly running and clean. I've lost my train of thought now. I need to think about what I was telling you.
Oh, I was asking how you do the forecasting. What kind of data are you using? Are you getting real-time data or?
Yes, so we have that data and we forecast. Then on top of that, you have what we call events. So you might have a local event where you might know that there's a festival happening in a certain town, and for that you need more ATMs, or you need more money in those ATMs. You might also then have a festival like a holiday. You know, there's quite a migration of customers from Gauteng going down to the coast, for example. That volume demand goes down to the coast. So then you will have more money going into Durban and Cape Town, for example, than into Gauteng in those holiday periods. An event could be anything. COVID was a massive event that had a massive impact on us. Because we had 7 years of data, you could actually throw it out the window because it completely changed the profile of how cash was required.
Wow. Given the number of areas that you cover with your ATMs and branches, that's a wide geographical scope that you have to cover for in your planning for these events, these
Yes.
extraordinary
Yeah.
events that's impacting your demand. So how do you keep track of what's happening in the country to know that something is going to influence demand at a particular region or town and the need for money in that town?
So we have, and it's probably possibly different for other banks, but we have one system that does all the planning countrywide for both ATMs and branches. It uses the data that we've got and forecasts, and then we have almost like a database of events, which knows that when are public holidays, when are Sundays, when are certain events, which can hopefully will be in history as well, that you can actually track when that demand is going to change, and it's also changes quite a lot. There's some things that you might not know about that you didn't expect, and then you do have your risk of cash outs. But it's almost reacting to that quickly so that you can recover from that as soon as possible.
At least you have immediate feedback from the branches, your ATMs, in terms of how much stock there is of money.
Yeah.
you don't have to guess. There's visibility in your system.
Yes, yeah,
That helps you.
all the time.
But other than that, you still have a push system. You're pushing your money up into the client in anticipation that there's going to be a need for it based on demand forecast.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, is this a lean system or is it more of a push-based system? Probably push-based, leaning towards lean principles through the fact that there's a high level of visibility in terms of what is available. And
So I think lean system is a good definition because you want to almost run out of cash before your truck arrives so that you never carry too much money in there. And I used COVID as an example just now. We ran a big risk of almost having too much cash in our ATMs because we forecast how much money was needed there, and then that demand died.
Wow.
So that is the risk that you take. So lean is definitely a good philosophy or good kind of view of it. I do think that the nature of ATMs has changed quite a lot too. I think a few years ago, an ATM there was to allow you to deposit cash and withdraw cash. Now ATMs can recycle cash. So now you can put money in, it'll count it, it'll filter it and say, this cash is fit to be redispensed, and it'll put it into a canister. This cash is not fit, and it'll put it into like a reject canister. So now you reduce your requirement to go to that ATM to reload it with more cash because it's recycling.
Okay.
And the trick is to get the balance right between your deposits and withdrawals. And that is quite a task. That might require multiple ATMs in some place, single ATMs somewhere else. But it has changed the profile of cash and reduced the frequency of how often you need to go there.
Interesting.
And with COVID, how have you seen changes in how people use money now? Are you seeing an uptake in more digital kind of services, or after COVID kind of died down, the demand for cash then kind of normalized again? Or are you seeing definite differences between how people were withdrawing cash prior to COVID and now?
So I think what COVID did, it did stimulate the growth in the digital market. I think digital has grown well in the last few years, but off a very small base. COVID escalated that growth, and it took the cash industry a good 2 years probably to get back to sort of normal levels of what we expected or what we anticipated and what happened pre-COVID. And I think that is going to push the decline in the growth of cash. And we are, in the very near future, going to get to a point where your growth will come to an end and start declining.
What I want to ask with regards to the demand, so I know there's only a certain amount of notes that are always circulating in the market, right? Because you're not able to just decide today that you want to manufacture more notes.
Yes.
So when you're planning for that, you're planning based on the number of notes that you know are out in circulation and coming back in. Can you just explain how you? Because that's
so I think
complex.
that's a SARB responsibility. They control the money supply, and they will work out what notes are required when, and also what coins. We often go through periods where we are short of certain coins. For example, 5 rand coins might be running behind. I'm not sure if it takes longer to manufacture, but we often have more pressure on coin than we do on notes. But yeah, they use the data from the banks to determine what is required, and then we'll manufacture as they need to.
Okay. So your job is basically just to plan demand of what you believe your customers are going to need in the market.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is across different channels. So you'll look at your demand for ATMs versus branches, cash centers, and then your devices sitting in retailers, and try and roll that up into single view to see what do we do per suburb, per town, per region.
And from a technology perspective, can you just take us through some of the technologies that have kind of disrupted the banking world? We know blockchain is one of them. There's probably other technologies like artificial intelligence. Can you just take us through some of the technologies that you're seeing really, really changing the banking industry?
So I do think it's a digital payments you were talking about. PayShop was introduced recently, and that is trying to make it easier to do payments and more cost effective. As you say, the blockchain technology is trying to allow payments without running through a banking service. That has a big impact. Artificial intelligence is an interesting one because we've looked at to see how can we use artificial intelligence to forecast demand better than we're doing at the moment. And it's an interesting problem because your demand is based on a couple of million customers, depending on which bank you're at and where you are. But how do you roll up that demand, which is quite erratic, into a kind of an artificial tool an AI tool that can learn and predict where you're next going to withdraw cash? Take you an example. When was the last time you withdrew cash?
This morning, actually.
Okay, okay, well, thank you. You're a good example. Do you always go to the same ATM?
No, it was a completely different
Because
ATM.
most of the time it's somewhere close to your house or close to your business.
Yeah,
But no one can predict that.
yeah.
Today might have been an exception. I'm not sure how often do you withdraw cash?
Very often. I only need cash for golf to pay my.
Yes, your fees.
Yeah, no.
Your
When I lose again.
Yeah, so I don't think you and me are the market when it comes to cash.
Yeah.
And that's why. So no one can forecast what you're going to do with cash.
Yeah, true.
You can forecast your SASSA grants. You can average your kind of payday dates. You know your certain ATMs are going to pay out.
Yeah.
But you are definitely averaging to get a view what's going to happen in a certain area.
Yeah, because SASSA grants are paid, normally 3rd, 4th, 5th month?
Yes, so they spread over a few different days.
Yeah, and then you more or less know when companies are paying out,
Yes.
towards the end of the month.
Yeah.
But as you say, then you have all these extraordinary events and things happening. And all to us who are withdrawing cash, it happens like Luki said, she withdrew this morning, but there's no regular pattern to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
For people like us.
So the question is, can AI actually work in that environment? I haven't seen it. It might be working in other places, but we found that our own forecasting tool had a lower error rate than the AI tools that we were working on to try and test it. It's quite interesting.
Well, the AI tool will get better, that I can guarantee.
It will do.
Yeah.
And it'll get better at managing big data as well.
Yeah.
Taking it down to a customer level and working out how frequently and where you draw it.
Absolutely. Are there particular areas in the country where it's really difficult to get your cash delivered to? I would suppose the very remote areas in our countries might present you with some problems.
Yes, yeah. I think there's a few. There's your very remote areas, like you mentioned, like Northern Cape, vast distances to get cash. You often drive even 500 kilometers from a cash center to a branch and ATM to service it. Then you can talk about, well, how frequently can you get there? Because that's a long route, it's an expensive trip.
Yeah.
You might be encouraged to hold more cash in certain places because you can only get there twice or 2 or 3 times a week. Then you have remote areas where the infrastructure is quite poor, say Eastern Cape and some of the outlying areas of Limpopo and KZN, where you have the same kind of infrastructural problems, quality of roads, backup if something goes wrong with the truck, things like that. That's difficult. I think townships and informal settlements have different problems. They're easy to get to, but there are other issues. There's higher crime levels. There's different requirements in those areas.
I assume that transport and the transportation of cash is quite an expensive element.
Yes.
Also not only because of challenges when it comes to routing and scheduling and in building economies of scale and finding return loads and so forth, but also because of security.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you reflect at all on the security cost as a percentage of total cost of moving cash?
Sure, security costs. So what will happen is you have options. You can buy a security vehicle where you pay a fixed amount per month, and then you've got to kind of switch your asset to make sure that vehicle services as many branches and ATMs as you can. That's in regional areas where you can do that. In remote areas, you might not be able to afford to have a dedicated vehicle. So I don't know. I probably can't answer you as to what percentage.
But it's high cost.
Comparative to other logistics markets, it is considerably higher in the kind of like 500% type range.
Is it the biggest contributor to your cost? Like to the overall cost, if you look at your how you build the price of how you move your commodity around, is it the main contributor from a cost perspective?
I would say absolutely, substantially. If you have to work out what kind of system you need to deliver cash to, say, 2,000-3,000 ATMs, your cost of your distribution, your CIT trucks, with armored staff, with backup staff, with cameras, with video footage, with all the security that goes with it, it's definitely one of our biggest. It is by far the biggest cost.
And so most organizations always have KPIs to for the for supply chain to drive down some costs. So what kind of initiatives do you have as an organization to try and reduce some of the cost? Or is security one of those where it's like, when you have a path, you just like, this is the price, this is the one part of the pricing formula that we can't touch. We can't touch this, but everything else we can kind of play around with. Or are there initiatives that you guys have as an organization to kind of drive some of the costs down?
I'll give you an example. And I'm going to use the inflation rate versus the interest rate to explain this. If you take a cost of a vehicle now and you say, what is it going to cost me in 5 years? You can pretty much guarantee that you're going to have inflation of about 6-7% over the next 5 years. Coming to that cost, and you can forecast that. Take the same view of holding cash. Interest rates have been flat for quite a long time. So take the same cost of holding cash, and that graph is very different to your CIT costs. What it's doing is incentivizing you to hold more cash and move it less. So if you can have a secure facility, make sure your ATMs are secure, make sure your branches are secure, you're actually incentivized to hold more cash and move less. And by doing that, you can then reduce your number of trips and spread your load across a dedicated vehicle, for example, doing more ATMs than it does currently.
Okay,
that's interesting.
That is actually quite interesting. From a supply chain perspective, that the plan is to, I guess, I'll use this term, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, increase your warehousing costs by holding more stock.
That's exactly it.
And versus increasing your logistics costs, because your logistics costs are actually much higher than your warehousing costs.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And the other thing we're also trying to do is see how you can recycle cash closer to a source. So instead of, I'll give you an example, driving from Kimberley to Kuruman, that kind of 500 kilometer trip I was talking about, can you get a cash center in Kuruman? Is there enough demand there to justify that? Then you can have a base there, make sure that's secure. And then your trips into Kuruman are a lot cheaper because you're driving bulk cash into Kuruman first, and then from there into your ATMs and branches in the area.
Okay. That is something actually that's quite fascinating for me, because I always thought, how does the price?
It is. Yeah. I spend my life trying to work out how to do it differently. So that's what I do. Okay,
excellent. So just making the conversation a little bit higher level, in a country where most people are heavily reliant on cash, I think South Africa is still a very cash-based kind of country. How do financial institutions basically support inclusion?
So I think what's important is to get reasonable, cost-effective solutions to where the customers are. And that is why there's a drive to move away from these branches with buildings to the ATMs, and to make it cost-effective, so that there's a push to get mobile solutions as well. We have a lot of interest in mobile ATMs as well. Try and put those in remote areas at certain times. If you know for a certain day, you've got SASSA payouts, move a mobile ATM there for the week. You've got 3 days. Move it, then you can take it back and move it somewhere else later. The difficult thing with that is that your SASSA payout days are set countrywide. So your pressure is uniform. Yeah. So you can't just solve for those 3 days. I think that if I had to take a graph and work out how do you solve, and this is a normal logistics problem, you know a lot more about this than me. Where do you pitch your safety stock? Where you know on the 3rd and the 4th and 1st of the month, you need this much cash. On the 10th, 12th and 15th of whatever month, you have this much cash. So where do you position your stock? You can't. You have to actually have a model that can deliver cash on those 3 days and remove it on those days. So it's a daily issue. One thing we do track, which I find it's something you could almost write a dissertation on, is how do you determine the best service level? If you measure the uptime on an ATM, the cost of getting your uptime from, say, 92% to 95% is substantially lower than your cost of getting it from 95 to 98%. You get this hockey stick type curve. And the question then is, getting that extra 3%, does it have any impact on customer service? Because if you've got an ATM, if it is a cash out, which you haven't experienced, which I'm very pleased to hear,
I actually said maybe it was a cash out.
It was an out of order.
The question is, what do? You walk to the next ATM if you're in Joburg. You walk to a competing bank's ATM. If you're in Kuruman, you might have a different problem. You might have certain towns where this is the last bank in town. then you have to die 20 or 50 Ks. That
That's a
issue
big
is very
problem.
different
Yeah,
to a
yeah.
Joburg issue.
So some ATMs are more strategic in terms of its service delivery capability than others.
Yes.
So, yeah, I would think, to come back to your point, if you want to reduce your safety stock levels, then of course one way of doing so is having better information about your demand,
Yes.
and also in terms of your visibility. What do you have? Where is your stock, and how can you move it around to make sure that you deliver the service levels as required? You also, of course, have to know the trade-offs between what it costs you to carry the stock on one hand and what it costs you not to have the stock. So, typically, what is the reaction of a customer when there's no cash in the bank? So I should say, or in the ATM. So maybe they can drive to another ATM. But is it maybe such an issue that maybe you lose a customer that says, look, you know what, this particular bank hasn't got cash, or this ATM is never working, I'm going somewhere else. Surely you guys have monitored the reaction of customers to determine what is the real cost of a stock out, if I can call it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We monitor complaints all the time, and I don't think that's going to drive a customer to go somewhere else. And I think the lesson there is banks need to compete on other items, on the services that you can offer, rather than make sure your cash has got ATM. To the point that there is interest in the industry to start looking at these, what they call white ATMs, white label ATMs, where you can put an ATM in, say, let's take Fraserburg, little town in kind of border of Eastern Cape, Western Cape, over the mountain, very difficult to get to. You have 5 banks possibly putting cash in ATMs there, all driving from, say, George over the mountain to put cash there. Well, can you not collaborate, put a white label ATM there, take all the bank's logos off, and have one truck moving it there? You have SASwitch, so you have the technology to do it.
Is that tested?
Yeah, well, SASwitch works. SASwitch, you can go to any bank
Of
you
course,
like.
SASwitch works, yeah.
That would probably be the platform on which you'd operate.
So does SASwitch count as a white label sort of ATM?
So SASwitch is a software that actually allows you to, and I'm talking out of turn here, but my opinion is it allows you to go to any bank you like and withdraw cash. There are companies that do provide non-branded ATMs. You might find them in small little cafes where you might see a little ATM without a logo on. It might say supported by some bank. But I think the principle is if you can work out as an industry that you don't need to compete on all of you driving to Fraserburg to put cash there, compete on something else.
So what is then the how do you measure whether your customers are happy or not if it's not on stockouts, right? Of course, stockouts are not something you want to have, but how do you then measure yourself as a bank to say we're really servicing our customers well and we're really making an impact?
From a cash distribution level, we measure cash outs. We measure uptime of ATMs, and so that's a critical thing that's watched during the day, not even daily. It's watched during the day.
So what is the uptime? Well, how do you define uptime?
Uptime is if you know how much money you need out of an ATM on a daily basis. Do you have that money on the ATM? Is the ATM operating? Do you have load shedding issues, for example?
Okay.
As soon as your cash holding goes below what you think that demand is for the day, you actually record it as a
Okay,
cash.
so it's like a full rate. So a customer wants 100, you've got 98, you've got 98% full rate.
Yes.
So what is that full rate, if I can call it, that uptime percentage? What is that by average for you in the bank?
I think if you look at international stats, so I'll leave banks out of the conversation, just say generically, you'll be good if you're getting to 95, 97.5, 98% uptime. The question is, if I drop that to 95, what is the impact on revenue, on customer satisfaction, and customer service? If I drop it to 92, at some point you're going to get to a level where you are going to annoy your customers because they have to go to somewhere else. And I think there's a big debate. There's a lot of research saying what is that right percentage? How do you measure customer service against ATM uptime?
And I guess you also probably have an ABC kind of model where you have key customer areas where you know most of your revenue is coming from. And those are the areas where I guess you have the highest fill rate. Like that's where you definitely don't want to disappoint those customers. And areas where maybe not 95% or not 98%, but 90%, it won't really impact your revenue as an institution.
So I think you have a few scenarios. When it's a high demand area, you'll put multiple ATMs down there. Go to Sandton City, you might have a bank of 8 ATMs, so that there never is a situation where you ever run out, even at 2 in the morning, because you can get to the mall at 2 in the morning. That is one scenario. You might have a scenario in a remote area where what you'd like to do is have 2 ATMs. So if one's down for whatever reason, the other one's working. So it is very different in the economic areas or the sort of environment that you're servicing.
Okay. And just from a human side, what innovations is the industry looking to introduce to just make life easier for the everyday South African, especially those that are not living in, obviously, the more comfortable kind of locations?
Yes.
Yeah. What can we expect?
That'll be the drive for mobile solutions, the digital payments, making it easy, for example, to tap on your taxi driver's phone and pay him as you leave the taxi. Those kind of things. That's where the industry is moving, and it will have an impact on cash, and it will take cash down. But that is probably what the focus is.
And that would the reduction of cash impact the banking industry in a negative manner, or is the banking industry ready for that? Is that something that
I think the banking industry is working very hard to be there for it and be ready for it, to kind of even drive that migration. And I think you mentioned Sweden, where cash is going up, but the banking industry is still strong. People still have demand. You still want to do payments. You still need to receive payments. So I don't think it's a negative. It's going to change, but it won't be a negative if we do drop in cash. Okay. Unless you're like me, when you work in the environment.
Sometimes change happens slowly and then fast, like going bankrupt slowly and then quickly.
Yes.
And I wonder if the change to digital currency isn't going to be happening in the same way. It takes some time for an economy to adjust to it, for its people to adjust to it, and then suddenly, it's like cell phones.
Yes.
There's this. It felt like it's not going to happen, and then suddenly, it's like everybody is walking around with a cell phone.
So we've seen examples where that has happened. The M-Pesa payment solution in Kenya has had a dramatic impact. It's a digital payment system which has done extremely well. We haven't seen that here in this country. I think there are a number of factors which are causing people to still require cash. There are trust issues, there are privacy issues, the tax evasion risk that you spoke about earlier.
The infrastructure, the cost. Quite a few driving factors still ban cash. So it means that your job as you have it now is
I think
it's in place for a couple of years.
Yes. I'm getting old enough to retire, but I'll be fine until then, I think.
Okay. So if it was up to you and you could change one thing and introduce one major innovation in the banking industry, it could already exist or not exist at all, what would you introduce?
I would push white label ATMs because you can reduce your cost of service as an industry dramatically and have no impact on customer service whatsoever.
And how would that look? Would that then increase the mergers and acquisitions in the banking industry? I know it's not that popular in banking. Would we see more mergers and acquisitions if banks were moving into the white?
I think banks compete on different areas. I think the location of ATMs in remote areas wouldn't encourage any change in behavior on towards the mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
Banks do compete considerably. You've seen Capitec coming as a late entrant to the market, now being one of the biggest cash banks in the country. And that competition is rife and is healthy. I don't think changing your kind of profile of ATMs, the way you place them, will change that.
Will make any changes.
What do you think is the main driver for competition between banks? Is it cost or is it service?
Sure, you asked me in my personal capacity. I have to give it some thought.
Okay.
No, I just...
Because if it's service, then I'm just thinking in the role that you fulfill in getting cash to branches and ATMs is of incredible importance.
Yes.
But of course, that comes with quite a bit of cost behind it as well. But if you can have a better distribution of ATMs and a better availability of cash at your ATMs, your branches, does it give you a real competitive edge over your competitors?
So I think it's very hard to take your customer base and kind of look at them as one. Your demand from a bank, my demand from a bank is very different to what a recipient of a SASSA grant requires.
Of course.
And we're both customers. So that's where it's difficult to work out, well, how do I market to you? How do I advertise to you? And that's where the marketing often have to come and say, well, what services do you need? I like having an app that allows me to go on my phone and do transfers without having to go to a bank ever.
Yeah, correct.
That's what I'm after. Someone getting a SASSA grant on the 3rd of the month
Use the cash.
wants to be able to get there easily, so I want it close by. I want to not stand in a long queue, and I want to be able to go to a retailer right next door, so I'm not doing lots of traveling while I'm doing this. So you're going to make sure that you have sorted out things like load shedding. Your ATM has the cash when you need it. So that demand, and there are more of those customers countrywide than there are you and me.
Speaking about load shedding, was that a big problem for you when we?
Yes.
Fortunately, now
Yes.
load shedding is, not as big a problem. Hopefully, that will last for a long time. But
Yes.
there was a time when it was really problematic. Was it a big problem for you?
It was a massive problem. I think you can't forecast load shedding. So what happens is you load your
Even though
trucks.
there are schedules.
Yes, but you don't know. You've seen how often it changes. You start at one level and it changes to the next level half an hour later. So you might have, what is happening at 8 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock when the truck goes out. So I'm going to drive to a certain area. At 10 o'clock, load shedding kicks in and your truck gets there 2 hours later. That truck has to come back with that cash because it couldn't load it. And that's not one example. That happened often. To the point that banks are now putting down backup batteries, putting boosters and signal boosters to make sure that you've improved your uptime so that you don't have that risk. That, again, comes at another cost.
And of course, there's no one to answer for that. There's no one that you can blame as a bank. You basically just need to take that
You can't
cost.
send anyone a bill, no.
Yeah, you can't make anyone fit the bill. Yeah, that's quite unfortunate. I think we're probably reaching the end of our discussion. I don't know if there's anything else that maybe we haven't touched on that you would like us to discuss, that you think is quite critical for people to know about the supply chain and the movement of cash.
Sure, I don't think so, no.
What kind of skills are you looking for from a people perspective?
Yeah,
Do you
okay.
struggle to
Yes.
find skilled people?
We have some amazing skills in the bank. And if you take, I think any big organization, you need a range of skills. You need data analysts. You need your accountants, obviously, to keep all your accounts in check. You need people like me that likes to get into data and work out how to model things and come up with a different view of how to do things. So there's a range of skills. And that, there's probably those kind of things, the digital skills, the accounting skills, analytics skills is probably what you need. The understanding of blockchain technologies and artificial intelligence, that'll play an increasing role going forward.
Okay. So if I'm a supply chain professional and I'm looking to move into the supply chain department in your organization,
Yes.
what would I need to have?
So let's see. I think a normal kind of commerce type degree would be essential. I think the banks have worked hard to increase the qualifications of all the staff from the bottom level up. I think an interest in analytics. So I must say I live in Excel. I'm coming from the old school, and I talk to others about data and say, no, you use SQL, you use Power BI. I'm playing with that, but you need to understand those kind of tools, how you can manage that data to get views. And it is big data, and I think that's the trick, is how do you convert big data into information that can allow you to make a better decision. Those type of skills, I think, will be in high regard.
Okay. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, maybe last question from me, Lance. How is the bank structured to allow the resources that deals with the logistics issues, such as the distribution of cash?
Yes.
What is the structure like? Do you have a logistics division? Do you have a planning division? Where do you fit in? And
So
report to the
our bank has a cash management division, and then we have what is called a physical channels division, which then is responsible for ATMs and branches, and then you'll have a digital division. From a cash perspective, you have different departments. One of the key ones is risk management, as you understand with you in cash. Risk management often drives your behavior in a bank. Then you have what we call something like product support. You have your business intelligence area, which is where I fit in. You have cash modeling, and then you have your supply administration. the company, the people that have to actually receive the bills from the companies that provide the CRT vehicles, that do your services, handle forex for you, for example. You have a team that has to do all those payments. And then you have your big requirements to contract. So you have contract managers, you have lawyers, legal departments, procurement specialists. It's quite a big machine.
Wow, okay. Well,
Okay.
just shows you money is a product. It's a commodity, and there's a whole logistics
I
system
think we need
behind
to
it.
update that.
The curriculum
I think we need to update that little line that's written cash.
The 3 flows.
Yeah, I think we need to update that 3 flows. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us on the Supply Chain Lab. I really appreciate your time, Lance. Hopefully you'll come back and teach us some more about the money supply chain. Maybe you'll create the diagram for us that we can then use in all our institutions and just update students on that supply chain.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dikluki.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.